Hey everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of Ideologues. I'm your host, Mike Brancatelli. Welcome to the show. And if you're joining us for the first time, usually what we do on this show, what we try and do, is explore a lot of big topics and big ideas in our world with a psychedelic point of view or a psychedelic mindedness, and always a focus on cognitive liberty, the freedom to explore our own consciousness and be free and have free thought and free expression and free speech, because freedom is so important, right? I mean, that's what we try and we'll focus on here at Mycadelic. And today's guest is Robbie Martin. Robbie Martin is a filmmaker. He put out a documentary series called A Very Heavy Agenda, exploring the neoconservative kind of influence into foreign policy, and it's a great film series. Go check it out, and we're gonna put the links to all that stuff in the show notes. Robbie's also co-host of Media Roots with his sister Abby Martin, and Media Roots is a great podcast and resource, MediaRoots.org, where they stand for reporting from outside party lines. So I can get behind that, right? And so, yeah, today's discussion is going to be about foreign policy and global kind of politics, geopolitics. And so Robbie joined me to talk about this kind of stuff, because honestly, it could be very confusing to a lot of people who aren't really paying attention to what's going on in the world. And I think that the current climate that we find ourselves in is lending a little bit of an opportunity now more than ever to come together on an important issue that I think that has been kind of omnipresent for all of my life, and that issue is the issue of war, quote unquote war, or just the expansion of our empire and our global death march across the world to influence and shape things in the way that we want them to be. And so we talk about what that is and why this is happening and what we can do about it. And it's a great discussion. I really enjoyed talking with Robbie. I think that he's got such a deep understanding of the intricacies of all of this kind of this neocon ideology and this kind of aggressive expansionist foreign policy that seems to be so just kind of normalized in our lives. And I think a lot of people maybe that listen to this show have grown up in the same kind of time period, the same kind of coming of age, where I was a teenager when 9/11 happened. And, so we've grown up in this environment where this is the new normal, where we're just constantly at war. We're constantly bombing. There's you hear strategic drone strikes and these sorts of things, and we don't even really bat an eye to it anymore. The large anti-war movement that was under George W. Bush has seemed to faded away during the Obama administration, but hopefully now maybe there can be a resurgency in that movement and we can start to see some opposition. And I know there's a lot of people that claim that they resist Trump, and maybe they'll march about Trump not releasing his taxes or whatever, but is that really the most important thing to oppose right now? Is that really what we should resist right now? I don't think so. I think the resistance is resisting the power structure that we seem to always inevitably fall back into, allowing these people to take power, rise to power, and get away with the sorts of things that they are getting away with in our name. And you'll hear Robbie talk about that on today's episode. So without further ado, we're going to hop into this conversation. But before I do, I will just say real quickly, shout out to all the people that are supporting me on Patreon. Really appreciate all of your support. If you want to go support me on Patreon, go to patreon.com/MikeBrank, and you can support me there. If you can't support me on Patreon, or you just don't want to for whatever reason, you can just leave me a iTunes rating and review. iTunes ratings and reviews really help the show. We've gotten a lot of them so far, and they're all positive, and I really love it. I love who doesn't love reading nice things about them, So if you want to support the show, if you get value from this show, and you feel like just sharing your love and support, please like it, share it with friends, and if you can, write a little positive rating and review, 5-star rating and review. And if you are so generous, go over to Patreon. Patreon.com/Mike Brank, BRANC, and you can support us that way. Every little bit counts, folks. Every little bit counts. For $1 a day, you can help feed this child, who is me, not a child. But anyway, here we go. Robbie Martin. Enjoy.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open to us the possibility that everything we know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Voice of perception.
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity. The opportunity.
Awesome. So yeah, Robbie Martin is here with me today. Robbie Martin, the co-host of Media Roots and filmmaker of the documentary A Very Heavy Agenda. Robbie, thanks for joining me today, man.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, we've been, so like we were talking before I started recording, and we've been kind of going back and forth on Twitter. We seem to share the same concern for our foreign policy. Or just these crooks in DC and the kind of things that they're meddling, getting into, and it's good to have you on and talk to you about this stuff. I think that a lot of people say, oh, this is an important time to talk about this stuff, but now more than ever. But as you know, this has been going on for quite some time, right? The kind of situations that we get ourselves in the world, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's been going on as long as I've been alive. But I mean, it really took a drastic, dive off the deep end after 9/11. So was kind of my political awakening, so to speak, was, that was a very pivotal moment for me. And then, of course, the Iraq War. And then, since then, it's never stopped. I mean, we're in essentially an infinite war against an enemy we can't see or define. A war against a tactic, terror. So, yeah, right. It's pretty bad.
Yeah. And you mentioned 9/11. I mean, I'm sure everybody remembers where they were on 9/11. Do you remember where you were on 9/11?
Yeah, I was asleep. And I live on the West Coast, so by the time the second tower was hit by a plane, it was like, I think it happened around 6 a.m, my time. So I was deep asleep, and I got woken up by a call from my mom, basically telling me to turn on the TV right now, that America was under attack. And I was like, who, first thing I asked her was, who did it? And I remember this is one of the more interesting things I remember from 9/11 was she told me Palestinians did it.
Oh.
And I was like, wow, Palestinian, that's pretty crazy. And then I found out later in the day that was kind of more of a false rumor that it got replaced with Bin Laden did it. But one of the things I did in my documentary film, A Very Heavy Agenda, was I tried to go back to the day and actually comb through where that rumor came from, that Palestinians did the attack. So that's a whole, for some reason, I'm very fixated on that aspect of 9/11. Mm-hmm. It was something I didn't really look at closer before, but, I also remembered things that, later became sort of truth or lore. Like I remembered Building 7 from the day of of 9/11 and stuff like that. So I have a weird, different sort of memory of it than a lot of other people. And I guess I'm a little proud of this. So I'll toot my own horn a bit on the fact that I was anti the Afghanistan war from like day one.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, it wasn't just because I wasn't a vehement anti-war person back then. It was probably in large part to the fact that I was dating someone who lived in Japan, who had Japanese citizenship, and they saw sort of the American foreign policy and political climate very differently than most Americans did at the time. And she had taken me to the Hiroshima Museum a year earlier. And that actually kind of primed me, I think, for like really questioning things, questioning the conventional wisdom that our government tells us.
Right.
So it's a combination of factors, but yeah, that was my awakening. And, I never really stopped from there, except I just didn't have the knowledge back then to like, really be able to debate people and things like that. I just it was more like my intuition, like a gut feeling. And so just sort of over the years, I've been trying to, learn as much as I can and actually be able to contribute something to fight against it. So.
Yeah, well, I mean that's you definitely have made a major contribution in my mind. I mean, with your film, A Very Heavy Agenda, it's just it's absolutely incredible, man. I mean that what you've put together here, it really gives like a new look into the world of the kind of behind the scenes, somewhat mundane and boring and kind of banal, like, life of these people who dream up these situations to get us in, think tanks and all these people that are the kind of, they're outside of our public consciousness. When the ordinary person thinks about government and foreign interventions and things like that, they're not thinking about Robert Kagan and Victoria Nuland. They don't know who these people are. And I think that you did a tremendous job of putting together just a window, like a look into what's going on in this world, in this kind of this new system of government, I would say, that we live under. This is not the system of government that we learn about in school, where how a bill becomes a law and all this stuff. This is something that has recently added on to the giant apparatus of government in terms of these quote-unquote intellectual people or scholars having major influence in our policies, both at home and abroad. But Heavy Agenda focuses on the abroad, the foreign policy, and and I think that I think first of all, just to talk about the documentary a little bit more, A Very Heavy Agenda. It's a 3-part series. And, actually, maybe, Robbie, why don't I just let you tell the listeners about it, explain A Very Heavy Agenda and how it's set up and where people can go and see it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for your kind words about it as well. It's a 3-part documentary series at current. It's actually going to be 4 parts.
I know. I saw that the teaser for 4. I was like, oh my! I saw the Star Wars teaser dropped a couple days ago, and I was like, ooh, that's exciting. And then I think I went to your like Twitter page, and I was like, oh, another episode 4, new trailer.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
So this, yeah, I'll describe 1 through 3 because those are the ones that are actually out that people can watch right now.
Yeah, please, yeah.
So if your listening audience is familiar with, probably most people are familiar with Fahrenheit 9/11 as kind of like the most mainstream version of sort of a lesson in the neoconservatives but specifically the more famous neoconservatives inside the Bush administration. So Wolfowitz, some of the Iraq War architects that were in Bush's cabinet. Adam Curtis made a brilliant film series called Power of Nightmares, which is a little more obscure, but that one is all about the neocon philosophy. And it's very long, and it kind of more just goes over the general neocon philosophy and parallels it with Wahhabism and Islamic fundamentalism, how they actually share similarities in sort of their worldview.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like there wasn't a film yet or a documentary yet about who I see as sort of the more dangerous neoconservatives in this country, the sort of the intellectual class of neoconservatives, a lot of them who stay outside of government and who merely advise or who offer suggestions or they consult with people in government to give them ideas on what to do foreign policy wise. And 99% of the time, those ideas mean escalating a potential war scenario in some fashion,
Mm-hmm.
whether that means, putting more sanctions on Russia, sending NATO troops to Russia's border, sending a naval fleet armada to North Korea, which Trump just did,
Mm-hmm.
or bombing Assad, bombing Assad's military base. That's something the neocon intellectuals have wanted since 2013. They were hugely disappointed when Obama announced that Assad had crossed the red line and that he backed off from it.
Mm-hmm.
That was the moment when, and this is something that I cover in a very heavy agenda, that the neocons were there to really help solidify the continuity between Bush and Obama. They knew that Obama was inexperienced. He was going to be malleable by many of outside forces, and they kind of foresaw that he would have to, almost by necessity, just based on who he was, continue a lot of the Bush policies. And I'm no way giving Obama an excuse. I think his foreign policy was atrocious. But I think that the neocons really, they knew that it was going to be a huge challenge for Obama to actually reverse the Bush engine. And they jumped in the fray and were there encouraging Obama at every turn. So the neocons, right when he got into office, were like, yeah, send, I think Obama sent 30,000 more troops to Afghanistan. Maybe it was actually 70,000. I can't remember the exact number, but they were cheering on his Afghanistan war surge. They were completely on board with the Libya, bombing campaigns that later morphed into regime change, which Obama promised it wasn't going to be regime change. So they were completely on board with those things, and they were actually for Obama in some ways. I don't know if they ever voted for Obama, but it was like at that point in time, what we actually saw happening was the neocon ideology in DC that had been mostly associated with Republicans and sort of more the right-wing side of the spectrum. We started to see it spreading across to the Democrat side of the spectrum, to the point where these neoliberal Democrats in DC started to adopt and sort of join forces with this neoconservative intellectual class in DC. And Hillary Clinton, I think, was the primary point person inside Obama's administration who opened the door for that.
Right.
And we can, you can find a direct link between her and the Project for the New American Century, which is the main think tank I sort of, start from in a very heavy agenda, where she hired Robert Kagan to be in the U.S. State Department during the Obama administration on what she called the Foreign Affairs Policy Board.
Right, a bipartisan initiative, right, as she put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what the neocons were really good at during the Obama administration, is they figured out how to create a bipartisan approach with their message, and it worked. I think it worked to their favor to an amazing degree, to the point where it's almost now impossible to actually say that neoconservatives are either conservatives or they're Republican. You can't even really say that anymore because it has spread so far across the whole spectrum. And I mean, we really saw that in a large way with Hillary Clinton's presidential run this election.
Yeah.
How she actually was being endorsed by this exact same neocons who were behind the Iraq War. I mean, Elliot Cohen, Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan actually openly endorsed her for president.
Mm-hmm.
So it was and that was, I mean, and maybe this is, I may be covering a little bit more of the boring angle of my film, but
No, this is all
this was
interesting stuff because, like you mentioned, these were guys. I remember being, in the Bush years, everybody's railing against this kind of foreign policy, and these guys really got tarnished. But then they were managed to rebrand and sneak in and sabotage some of the ideologies of the left, or so to speak. But no, go ahead, continue. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, I mean they, and this is not to say that like it's one of those things where now people will be like, well, the neocon, people will still say the neocons are gone, now it's the Democrats who are the hawks, and I think on the surface that actually seems true, but what's really happening is the neocons are extremely influential still in the way that in the way that people see the world in DC. This idea that it's America's role essentially to be the world's police force, and that we need to maintain this world order system that America has been in charge of since the end of World War II. That sort of dogma has infected everyone, and people like Robert Kagan, they're different than other neocons in the sense that Robert Kagan actually creates a framework to make it appear that America has always been neoconservative, and it's not some kind of mutation or aberration of what the Bush administration did, that it's actually, that's very in line with America's sort of modus operandi since World War II. And he'll sort of try to rewrite history to make people feel like, well, yeah, this really actually isn't that different or abhorrent. This is sort of the normal way we do things. And he sort of emphasizes that bipartisan foreign policy consensus. That's a point he'll often make, and it's illustrated perfectly with his wife, Victoria Nuland, who she is supposed to be nonpartisan. She has been in the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration. She's not in the Trump administration. I think she actually resigned kind of out of protest, but she has been instrumental in this sort of new Cold War escalation, and she did it while working under Obama. And I mean, there are just so many more things I could say about it. But basically, I think people who listen to your show would be interested to watch it if they want to just see who these, who are these sociopaths. Right. And what do they actually say that encourages war, and how sociopathic are they really? Are they just, do they really believe this? Like in their heart, is this an ideology for them, or is it to make money on the side from defense contractors and things like that? Right. So it's actually, it actually mixes together. It's on some level, it does seem like they really believe it, but they're also motivated by greed. And in some sense, like ego, because the America being this sort of all-powerful nation that's supposed to take care of every situation in the world is sort of an arrogant, egotistical projection in some way. So they're definitely motivated by that as well. But and there's also the Israel factor, where most neoconservatives are also leaning towards being Zionists, where they feel like Israel is also exceptional, that it's not just the United States, that Israel should be allowed to do, a lot of horrible things because it's in their self-interest, and they, should be able to do those things, in the same way America should be able to torture and should be able to, hold people indefinitely in Gitmo and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because when we're facing an enemy who's this fierce and this terrible, then the rules are off the board. It's anything goes. And with the Israel situation, it's like, well, look, this is the only democracy that we have in the region, and the only non-Muslim state. So we got to stand strong with our partners and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you said a lot of interesting things, and I think that one of the things that I really liked about A Very Heavy Agenda was the way that the media is used to slowly drip out this kind of new narrative and transition from, for example, say, fighting the war on terror, or terror, as Bush used to say, terror, fighting the war on terror to now a new Cold War with Russia. I really liked the way that you presented these kinds of transitions in a very heavy agenda through the thinking of the neocons and their kind of surreptitious kind of slithering through things and transforming and molding to new situations and adapting. And then you see how it's presented in the media and how they drip it out slowly and slowly over time, and how they stage things to happen with the Liz Wall incident. And then you have these kinds of new neocons that engage in these kinds of psyop tactics with James Kirchick and Eli Lake and these new guys. So very well done with that, because I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle to understand. Is it seems like when we're sitting, when we're living our lives, when we're going on, the average person throws on the television, they're just like, all right, what's going on in the world today? Look at the paper, what's going on in the world today. But the approach that you take by examining this and dissecting it in a very heavy agenda, you're really showing people that, look, this is calculated, this is strategic, this is, they have these plans, they think these things up, and then they slowly kind of put them into place. And we slowly kind of become almost like conditioned to just accept it as normal, which is scary. It's scary to just be so conditioned now. And I wonder, one of my big concerns right now is, trying to reach out to people who I think, and I guess some people on the left, it seems like, have kind of strayed away from their top priorities being what I would consider probably the top priority is to be anti-war, to be anti-spying, and just the things that I think that you guys have remained, you and your sister Abby, of course, who have you guys have focused on and remained strong and true to, the stuff that we've seen, and now it seems like, what's going on? Do people still care about this stuff, or is it the fact that we've just become so confused and so whipped up about other kinds of things that it's hard to form maybe like a big anti-war coalition, or do you think maybe that there's going to be a resurgency now? How do you see that kind of playing out?
Well, it's kind of depressing. When I think about it, because
you're like, oh yeah, I feel the same way though. I really do feel the same way. So yeah, please.
No, you're totally right though. I mean, the left completely dropped the ball in terms of the anti-war energy. And I like to go back to, and I think we talked about this briefly over DM a while back, about how I think the turning point was, obviously, in a large way, it was Obama, because there was a simmering hatred that never went away during the Bush administration from the left and from a strong anti-war contingent of the left. And it sort of culminated when Cindy Sheehan went down and basically camped out near Bush's ranch in Texas, and they called it Camp Casey, named after her dead son who died in Iraq. And she became the face sort of the anti-war movement back then. And when Obama got into office, the groups MoveOn.org, all these sort of democratic, at the time they seemed more grassroots. Some of those organizations didn't seem like they were, Soros ran or controlled by the Democratic Party. But she got basically a crash course in how this engine worked when, as soon as Obama got in, she continued her message, stop the wars, stop the torture, close Gitmo, basically all the same things Abby and I talk about on a regular basis. And she found out very quickly that basically all these organizations tried to sort of shun her and kind of brush her under the rug and kind of turn down the amplitude on her, megaphone. And once she saw that happening, she kind of broke away from those groups, and continued on her own, speaking out against Obama's wars and speaking out against all the horrible shit he was doing with the drone wars. And she found herself shunned and ostracized by the same people that propped her up in the first place. And it was because this political engine, it was more important for them, to sort of roll out the red carpet for Obama, this wait and see attitude, this hope and change, and I think that in large part really created enormous, irreparable damage on the left, where way too many people just sort of sat back and waited to see what Obama was going to do, and then never really spoke up when he just continued all these Bush policies. And
Right.
I think that sort of set a lot of the Bush era into stone. I mean, once you have 2 8-year presidencies, two-term presidencies, basically continuing a war on terror, which is an illogical premise to begin with, it's set in stone at that point. So I think that's really where the left failed. But I guess I'm kind of a purist in this sense, where I've always thought that the left, in terms of being a strong anti-war force, was always sort of standing on a fundamentally problematic foundation, because the primary argument for not wanting to go into Iraq was that they didn't have WMDs. But I always like to think, well, what if let's just say Iraq did have all the WMDs Bush claimed he did. Now, would that mean a lot of these people would be for that war then?
Right.
Because that's the primary talking point, that Bush lied about WMDs, and he did. But if Saddam had WMDs, it was still not a reason to invade his country. It still was a completely immoral, horrible thing to do. Yet the left never really made that the primary talking point.
That's a good point.
And then
That's a very good point. Yeah.
And you can even go back before. Why is the Afghanistan war something that gets so little attention? And that was something that always bugged me about the anti-war left, was that Iraq took the focus, and it was always kind of more passively accepted that, yeah, it's not a great thing that we invaded Afghanistan, but it was sort of it actually, and you might remember this from when Obama ran, and John Kerry in 2004, that he called Iraq the dumb war,
right,
in opposition to Afghanistan being, I guess, what they thought was the smart war. A war to invade a country to find one man and destroy some Al-Qaeda training camps that later mission creeped into essentially regime change to get rid of the Taliban. That was never the original mission in Afghanistan. It was to catch bin Laden, yet we let him escape through the Tor Bor Mountains to Pakistan. So it wasn't. So if that's why we invaded Afghanistan, we completely fucked it up. And people out there have seen Power of Nightmares. There really wasn't very much for the U.S. troops to do once they got there. They didn't even find any Al-Qaeda. They had people from the Northern Alliance turning in anybody that looked Arab and claiming they were Al-Qaeda. And that's how the system worked. And, first 100 days in Afghanistan, they were just rounding up prisoners. Many of them were like neighborhood rivalries and things like that between the local Afghanis. So I think that we really need to go back and analyze all of these wars, and even analyze why Putin is able to do what he's doing in Russia, and how the U.S. essentially greased the skids for all that too with Boris Yeltsin. I mean, Putin was Boris Yeltsin's successor, essentially, and we let Boris Yeltsin assassinate countless people. He actually shelled the parliament with tanks while he was in office, and Clinton and the U.S. establishment was completely on board with it. We thought Boris Yeltsin was the greatest man in the world. And it was really only because Boris Yeltsin was willing to be on the same page as the United States.
Right.
Putin is obviously not. So we can't, that's when the propaganda starts, is when a world leader essentially starts, standing up to the United States.
When a world leader actually has his own thoughts and opinions about maybe how his country should be governed without outside influence. Wow, imagine that. Imagine someone having freedom of of expression and thought and control of their own situation. Yeah, it's pretty unbelievable, and it's pretty blatantly obvious, at least to me. I mean, I think that it's funny when I see, I'll watch clips of Putin, talking and things like that, and look, don't get me wrong, I think that, look, all politicians are obviously, politicians. They're going to be the same, I think, across the board. None of them are angels. None of them are total truth tellers. They all engage in kind of devious things and of that nature. But you got to listen to some of the things that these people say, and when you listen to it and it makes sense and it actually adds up after you do the research. But oh no, you can't have that opinion because what are you, a commie now? It's pretty crazy the level of psychological warfare that's deployed. I think, and that's something. I think that's something that maybe gets a little overlooked or not talked about. We talk about fake news and all this kind of stuff. But really, I mean, when you have, Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard, writing pieces and, people, these kinds of neocon people that you mention in your documentary, film, you have them kind of spreading sort of like, it's fake news, just spreading this kind of stuff and getting people engaged in a kind of mental frame of mind, right? So when they do execute these things, that the people that you don't see as many people out in the streets as there used to be, or as at least concerning the war, anti-war message.
Yeah, and you said something earlier about how some of this is slowly happening in the background, and I think that's a really important component to this, because we've lived through other eras of massive propaganda campaigns that have sort of been easy to detect, where during the Iraq War, one of the obvious ones was the push for, WMDs. And that happened very fast. A lot of people woke up while it was happening and were like, no. You're pivoting, you said this was about getting the people who did 9/11 and now you're pivoting to Iraq. It was very obvious to a lot of people. Unfortunately, not everybody, but a lot of people could tell what it was very blatant. But there's the other kind of propaganda campaign, which I almost think is more dangerous, is what we've seen with this wedge that the neocons were at the, were originally driving the bus on, but not anymore, which is the wedge between Russia and the United States, trying to portray Russia as, basically in the same way it was portrayed during the Cold War, as this evil empire.
Right.
And, Putin has done some horrible shit. I mean, even just if you want to just talk about the anti-gay propaganda law, that was actually something that the neocons deployed almost like a weapon. And James Kirchick was front and center of that. He was one of the people making the loudest noise about that law.
Yeah.
Now,
wait, so real quick, I just want to say, so you say deployed like a weapon. I think this is really important. So just like through the process of this, right? Because I remember this from watching in the documentary. Like, so they have this transition where they're like, all right, like, we gotta make these guys the bad guys again. We gotta paint them in this light. So they're writing pieces, they're doing things. Just walk me through like what that process is like from the research that you've done and the work that you put out in the documentary. Like how they get this stuff going. Where they put these messages out and then they actually deploy these kinds of talking heads for their agenda.
Yeah, I mean it's a very fascinating process, because this was, I think, what Jamie Kirchick and the Foreign Policy Initiative managed to do was seize on basically identity politics that mostly come from the left, and use it as a weapon to propagandize people. And and that's not an uncommon thing these days. We saw Hillary Clinton and all of her Democratic operatives also deploying identity politics as a weapon,
right?
Basically saying that everybody who, was a Bernie supporter was a Bernie bro, and they were mansplaining and they hated women. I mean, we saw this time and time again.
Right.
So it's been used for a while. I'd like to think, just based on my research with this Russia stuff, that it really kind of exploded with this gay law in Russia, where the neocons didn't seek out Republicans. They didn't go to Breitbart. They didn't go to Fox News, and send Jamie Kirchick on Fox News to talk about the Russian gay law. They went to left media outlets like MSNBC and even Dan Savage from The Stranger. He might seem like a minor figure. He doesn't really have a political influence, but I would argue that he actually does. He has a pretty significant one. I mean, he was
he's
the
got
one
an audience.
Yeah, he was the one putting together that It Gets Better campaign for the Obama administration, where sort of like a gay, awareness kind of campaign. So he promoted the shit out of Jamie Kirchick and kind of helped solidify him as this liberal hero of some kind. Jamie Kirchick went on Russia Today and did a live protest where, ironically, he was asked on Russia Today because he wrote an editorial saying that Chelsea Manning should be executed. And he wrote this in Out Magazine, a gay publication. He's gay. And they basically, they had a neocon write an article about how liberals and gay activists should shun Chelsea Manning because Chelsea Manning is a traitor. So Russia Today was asking him on because he was advocating for the point of view that Chelsea Manning should be executed. And instead of talking about it, he just interrupted the broadcast and said that he was there to protest the Russian gay law. So a lot of people fell for this, and they were like, yeah, like, this guy is like, really sticking his neck out there and like standing up for gay people everywhere. But the backstory, or the underneath the surface layer, is that Jamie Kirchick was actually a fellow at the Foreign Policy Initiative, which is Bill Kristol's new neocon think tank that was rebranded after the Bush administration because, as you said, the neoconservative brand had been tainted and sort of destroyed. So this was, I think, one of their biggest pushes into the zone of liberalism or more left-leaning thought. And I think from there, it really infected it. And the push against Russia was mainly sort of developed and constructed in the zone of, left of spectrum politics. Right. If you think about it, they didn't really try to get people on the right wing to think Putin was the greatest evil. And we kind of saw a split where now, when you see polling, it's the Democrats who are more concerned about Russia than Republicans. A lot of Republicans actually admire sort of, Putin's strength or whatever. Like, I mean, that's actually become sort of a thing. So it's very much, and back to you're saying this is a slow motion process. This is what's so dangerous about this is it's been going. There's been a slow, I would almost describe it as moving the ball down the field, without anybody noticing, build to make people feel like Russia is what we should be focusing on and that Russia is sort of the greatest threat right now. And that's very, very troubling because I don't think that, and that's different from the Iraq WMD thing, which happened very fast and sort of in a very intense way. But I actually think this sort of Russia hacking the elections, Russia hacking the DNC and costing Hillary the election is sort of the 2016 version of the WMDs. Right. But the difference is we've been primed for over 3 years before that to feel like, oh yeah, of course they did it. Regular people, they intuit that because they've been primed to think that Russia is this ultimate evil and that Putin is omniscient and he's manipulating things all over the world, which actually really it's a projection. That's what we do. That's what the United States does. So
yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
And ultimately, I think all of this is designed to take our focus away from the evils of our own country. Right. Because as long as we have some kind of outside enemy to project all of our discontent on, then it's just going to make it easier for people to accept what our government's doing. Because our government doesn't poison journalists or whatever they say, but I mean, you could argue that the anthrax attacks is very suspicious. And that's something that I've investigated quite heavily, where I do think that our government actually used a bioweapon to create a chilling effect and to grease the skids for the Iraq War. But you'll never hear that, anybody pundits here say that. It's all about Putin kills journalists.
Right.
Putin does this and that. We killed a ton of journalists in Iraq. Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya TV got directly bombed, even though we knew where they were. Mm-hmm. So what was that? Was that us killing journalists, or was that an accident?
Yeah.
Of course, it's a foregone conclusion that Putin's directly involved in all these murders. And that's kind of the way that, that is, people just accept that now. And maybe he is involved in some of those murders. I'm not disputing that entirely out of hand. I'm just saying that there's a double standard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think it's I think it's part of, like you said, the priming. It's like we've been primed to just kind of accept the things that have been being, that are being blasted out through all the mediums that we go and consume information and media and things like that. So we get this priming that happens, and then there's also this psychological effect of like, kind of like a Stockholm syndrome, where you don't necessarily want to accept the fact that you're being ruled by sociopaths and murderers. It's like, no, our guys are good because we have a tradition of democracy and we have a tradition of freedom, and we're the greatest country. And it's just this kind of repetition where you repeat these mantras, and it's the priming effect that happens is pretty amazing. Where it really takes a lot to kind of crack somebody out of that shell and try and make them see things. Like you say, like with your podcast, Media Roots, it's reporting from outside of party lines, because I mean, this is really what this is about. I mean, this isn't really about parties and things like that. This is really more about a specific agenda that's being laid down, for this empire that we live in. We live in an empire, whether we want to admit it or not. That's the case, and sometimes when we talk about, oh, yeah, there's a bipartisan agreement, isn't that wonderful? People tend to think like, oh, that's wonderful. Look at this, the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans coming together. This is what America's all about. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily inherently good just because people are agreeing. Like if they're inherently, if they're agreeing on bombing and killing people, it's that's not necessarily something that we want them to be coming to an agreement on. But yeah, I think that I think it's definitely, we definitely live in interesting times, and I think that a lot of people, especially people who are around our age, have grown up with this just being the norm, So it's kind of like a fish in water kind of thing, It's like, well, we've always had this war on terror, we've always had these kinds of things happening, so we can't really imagine what it's like to be outside of the water. This is what we've been swimming in for so long. But I really want to try and like just kind of shift things back to I guess what I would consider to be a proper perspective. Either you align yourself with people who are for war, for intervention, or for all these things, or for peace. There's other ways of doing things, and I think a part of what I'm doing with this show, Mycadelic, is kind of trying to decondition people to that, shatter that mold, that conditioning, and just bring people back to something that maybe we can all find common ground on, that we can all agree on, that maybe being an empire and being the police of the world and going around imposing our will isn't necessarily the best strategy. I think we can find common ground on that, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I try to stress that as often as I can. I mean, there's been, we've been divided so much. Things are so polarized right now that it seems impossible to do that. But I think actually right now is a good opportunity because Trump is disappointing a lot of his base after this bombing of Assad's base in Syria. And I think that we are seeing right now a possible turning point where Trump could go, full neocon. It seems like it's going there right now. And people, it's it almost, I guess it seems almost completely impossible for, people on the left to sort of have solidarity with anybody in the alt-right or even libertarianism. But I think it's actually a lot easier to find solidarity between, because libertarianism has always been traditionally anti-interventionist, and I think that a lot of those people are much more savvy than most of the Trump sort of contingent, the base of his voters, and I think that's a bridge that can be used to form solidarity. And I already tried to do it. I'm more on the left, but I'll try to find any libertarian I can that sort of shares my passion on this front, because it's extremely important. And I think there's not enough of us out there, and that's really the tragic thing is
right.
We just need to be loud and persistent and find other people like us, because there's not very many. And there's a lot of people who, will try to, they're figureheads of certain movements, or, they walk the walk, or they talk the talk of being anti-interventionist, but at the heart, they're not. I don't think a lot of these people are really coming at it for the right reasons. It's maybe more of a, for example, one of my examples I use is meddling in Syria. For a lot of people, the line is bombing Assad, which is understandable. But I'd like to think, why are we even meddling there at all?
Right.
Why are we bombing ISIS? Why are we funding the rebels? Why are we allowing that in any form? I mean, it's
why are we not listening to Tulsi Gabbard, who visits Syria and comes back and tells us there's no moderate rebels there. But for some reason, Dennis Kucinich, Tulsi Gabbard, these kinds of anti-war people in the Democratic Party, they're getting shunned by supposed left-wing networks. They're not getting the kind of respect that they deserve in terms of speaking out for this kind of stuff. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and this is the problem with this new Cold War McCarthyism is when you have people like Tulsi Gabbard and Dennis Kucinich saying things now like this Syrian gas attack could be a false flag, they're immediately pushed into this corner or portrayed as being Putin apologists, or now they're actually, alt-right somehow. Like Tulsi, like I see people trying to portray Tulsi Gabbard as this, now she's basically a Trump alt-right, person, because
really
she's going against the conventional wisdom of her own party and the left. And it's like, that's, and I mean, even, I don't know if you're familiar with like Matt Taibbi, Michael Tracy, these are holdouts who haven't gone along with this Russia hysteria. Right. And because of that, they're being portrayed as being Putin apologists, or they're just alt-right, somehow. Because, if you don't agree with the Democratic Party's dogma on this Russia stuff, that means you're a Trump apologist or you're a Putin apologist. I mean, that's how bad the dialogue has become. I mean, I've even seen people writing, 100-part mega Twitter threads trying to explain their which I think is crazy conspiracy theory, essentially saying that Bernie bros were actually Russian bots. That all these Bernie supporters were actually being part of some kind of Russian propaganda campaign. I mean, so it's pretty. I think it's pretty dangerous that things have gone to that level.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's going to be, speaking out against this stuff right now is risky in the sense that you could be painted that way. But I think it's worth the risk, because you just have to remember that that mindset, that new McCarthyism is bullshit. And people should not, I don't think it should be a concern, because I mean, right now is the time to really speak out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's just I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, that's exactly, it's just like, it's such a mess, I mean, like, maybe Alex Jones is right. Maybe we're with the name of his show, InfoWars. I mean, you got to admit, like, I think we're in a totally new era warfare that we haven't really been exposed to yet, because with new technology, with the exposure of that people get on a daily basis to just being bombarded with all sorts of things, and you talk about this in your documentary. You talk about this kind of psyop confusion, keeping people confused by saying contradictory things, undermining people's perception of the world, so they're never they're never really sure what's going on, and I think what we're seeing is a lot of people are just resigned to just being kind of apathetic, and that's the scariest thing of all, is people being apathetic, not having any interest. I think they're just like, look, it's so crazy and it's so confusing. I never know what to believe or who to trust. I just don't care anymore. And then the less people that are interested and care, the more that these neocon hawks and people can get away with things, and they can just keep marching to the beat of their own drum, pushing this agenda forward.
Yeah, I mean, the thing just on a psychological level, human beings are, by their nature, I think, are empathetic creatures.
Yeah.
Like everybody feels, everybody, has the ability to critically think. And I think that, we can't, just on a psychological level, letting this much mass murder happen under our name on a regular basis, and then just pretending like everything's normal and going about our daily lives, it's taking a toll on our mental health.
Yeah.
And just and if you want to put in a larger framework, that's the health of our society. Like, I don't think that we can, it's almost like we're running on borrowed time, whether it be accumulating all this karmic debt in terms of the people that we're murdering all over the world for virtually no reason, all the energy we're consuming. I mean, you just look at a state like Florida, everybody there has the air conditioning turned up all day long. It's kind of like America is living in this sort of paradigm of borrowed time and piling up this enormous karmic debt of murder, basically. Yeah. And I think that it's really important, especially if you have kids, or, it's like, this is not an example to lead your own life by at all. I mean, and look at the things people do. I mean, this Cleveland shooter yesterday, I'm not one of those people who says video games or those kind of things cause mass shooting, but like, I think a lot of these mass shootings are because we're a mentally ill society. Yeah. Because a lot of this foreign policy stuff, that's normalized. Yeah. That I really believe that. So I think it's really serious just on that level. Even if you don't even pay much attention, geopolitics is intimidating, and actually like understanding those dynamics, it takes time and it's challenging, but just on that basic level, killing in our name, it just needs to stop, and it's totally unnecessary. There needs to be a much stronger, movement against it.
Yeah. Wow. Robbie, that was great, man. You just said some awesome stuff right there. And, yeah, I agree with you 100%, because, look, you're definitely a psychedelically inclined individual. You've been known to dabble. I have a show where I talk about psychedelics a lot, but the reason why I want to also, I talk about this stuff and I bring the psychedelics into the context is because, when I say the word psychedelic, it also I kind of just mean it in more of an open-minded kind of way, a more empathetic way of living, a more in tune to an energetic frequency and a kind of a bigger scope of seeing the world. And I think you tapped into that just now with what you said about the kind of trauma that we're all experiencing from the energetic kind of just like imbalance or something that's happening, because all of these terrible things are happening. It affects us whether we realize it or not. And I think that what we may experience on an individual level in our own personal lives is something that can be magnified on a macro level to society at large, where we're all collectively experiencing abuse and trauma. And kind of we've developed this kind of PTSD almost as a civilization, And it's really a new phenomenon nowadays because of how globally connected we all are. But you're totally right. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head when you're talking about it. It's this what I like to think of as these old world power structures who operate in this fear-based mentality, who are distorting natural human evolution or progress, or just kind of natural human way of living, being connected to each other and being empathetic and that sort of thing in a good, healthy way, healthy relationship with each other and with our environment and all that kind of stuff. And here we have these elements that are heavily distorting that and heavily preying upon people. And there's a energetic frequency that we don't see. It's not tangible. You can't taste it or touch it, but we can all feel it. And it definitely affects our lives. And yeah, I think that this is something that's very, very serious and that doesn't really get talked about too much. So I think what you just said really kind of sums up where we're at right now in terms of dealing with all this stuff. You know, what's going to happen, man? I mean, is it going to get to a boiling point where something really bad is going to happen, and then that's going to cause everybody to kind of jolt out of it and really take action and realize how important this is going on? Or are we just going to be, you know, are we just going to continue to be fed highly advanced propaganda and keep kind of being confused and deceived and like you said, the killing that takes place and the murder that takes place in our name, and then we live in this crazy dystopian world where we're all in bunkers and FEMA camps, and you know, which way is it going to go? I mean, is there hope? Are you optimistic? Do you have hope? And if so, what's it going to take to kind of overcome this collective societal, cultural, psychological trauma?
Well, I definitely have some hope. I mean, I probably wouldn't even be able to do this if I didn't.
Right.
And I think, I mean, it's made me really hopeful to release this film. When I first made it, I thought it was just going to kind of be a blip, and certain people would find it interesting. You know, it's the whole thing is 7.5 hours. It's a huge investment for most people in our, short attention span era. But I was very surprised by the reaction that it got and how hungry it seemed like so many people were that just blew me away. Hungry for the sort of the anti-war message still, distilled down to something that, and I tried to present it in a way that was not necessarily partisan, that's kind of attacked everybody. I mean, not attacked, but criticized the whole system.
Yeah.
And it made me really hopeful that there is still a hunger. There's a thirst out there for this kind of information. And I think that what's hopeful is that there's still a void out there where there's plenty of room, plenty of opening for people to come out and speak strongly against war in all forms, regardless of if you're, a Republican or Democrat or left or right. I mean, that's, that cuts through everything, I think. So it's not, I even though I am depressed by the amount of polarization, and the amount of just how divided things are, I still think an anti-war message, it really does cut through all that stuff. And I think on a universal level, many people all over the country and all over the world can relate to that. It just has to be done, a little bit carefully, I guess, because I think that there's a lot of traps and pitfalls set up to fall into right now.
There are. What can you talk about maybe some of those traps and pitfalls that people can potentially fall into?
Well, yeah, I mean, the one of the most obvious ones to me is like this Syria debate is one of the most, I think, difficult ones to navigate because it's so polarized and so manipulated where, you say anything even remotely in defense of, or not even in defense of, but if you say something bad about the rebels, you're instantly accused of being an Assad apologist, which is, to me, is cartoonish, because it's kind of like, it would be like calling someone who was against the Iraq War a Saddam apologist, which, is laughable now. But a lot of people, liberals, people on the left, are using that as again, a smear tactic against Syrian intervention critics. And I think that's a very difficult one to navigate. And if you're up for the challenge, go for it, but just be aware of how much disinformation and how much of it is sort of being manipulated to push people into these corners and make them, appear to be Russian apologists or whatever. I'd like to think that my main thing with Syria is that we should not be meddling there. We should not be funding the rebels there. We should not be fomenting the civil war there. We largely created ISIS, so even in that regard, we're still cleaning up our own mess, and we're bombing civilians in the process. So that's the way I like to approach Syria. But I did, yeah. It's like, I think there's definitely traps out there, and the Russia stuff. It's the same thing. You're a Putin apologist if you don't believe that the DNC was hacked by Russia. So all those kinds of things exist. People just need to be aware of them and just be ready for smears and attacks, because they'll come if you get a large enough voice or your message out there enough. You'll start getting attacked. It's inevitable. But don't let that dissuade you away from doing it. As long as you know that you're on the right side. So.
Yeah, well, that's a powerful message right there. As long as you know that you're on the right side, because look, I mean, at the end of the day, CNN is probably not going to call me up or you up to come on and talk about foreign policy or something like that anytime soon. I don't think, but and if they do, it'll be like a minute and 30 seconds, and they'll just make it how they want it to be, but. Yeah, I think the real kind of awakening that still has to come is coming from the internet, online, through podcasting, through documentary series like yours that you released, and with alternative news networks and things like that. Although, then there is the thing of like, who do you trust and where do you go and which one do you look at? And so it's an interesting time that we're really living in right now. I do feel that there's a transition happening. I do feel like the kind of mainstream media, the older way of doing things, the kind of political establishment that we have is not really going to be able to maintain itself much longer. I don't know how much longer that is, but I think that we are in a good position because we have the truth on our side, right? I mean, we have, and not just the truth, but we stand in the moral position that we oppose this aggressive, kind of initiation of interventions and violence and things like that. And I think that when you stand on that side of things, that it's a lot easier to communicate your message and affect change. I mean, it's difficult sometimes when I talk to people who still think that, it's okay to just bomb a country as long as it was a targeted strike, and of course you're going to have some kind of collateral damage. We hear these words and these things repeated, but I think if you're able to strip all of that stuff away and just call it for what it is, and stand on that, I think the message comes out a little stronger, and hopefully we can have a little bit more influence into the consciousness of the public there, and maybe Trump being elected is a good thing. And maybe there's a silver lining there. Obviously, not a good thing, but maybe there's a silver lining there where it will draw people together who have been apart for so long over the past 8 years. So maybe that might be a possibility going forward. But I think that the work that you're doing is fantastic, and I think that you have maintained the course, you have stayed the course, you've been on point. You haven't really deviated. But what kind of like messaging tactics should we use to people who maybe have deviated from the course, or, maybe their priorities aren't really in line with what we feel that would what we feel would be kind of the number one priority. How do we message them, or how do we kind of approach them? What would you say to somebody that doesn't really have this kind of thing at the top of their mind? How do you kind of approach talking to somebody about joining the anti-war movement?
Well, I think one example recently that I think has worked a little bit for me is when I'm talking to. There was a moment where a lot of listeners of our podcast, Media Roots, thought that because we were so critical of Hillary Clinton, that somehow we were passively endorsing Trump, and they were very disappointed to hear that we were just as aggressive towards Trump as we were towards Hillary Clinton. We thought Hillary was going to win, like a lot of other people did. We thought it was pretty much guaranteed. Right.
Yeah, I thought that as well. I thought, Robbie, I was like, look, Hillary's going to win because, like you said earlier, Kagan endorsed her. Like, all these neocons are like, well, we'd probably prefer Hillary. So I'm thinking in my head, like, okay, there's strategies lined up. They're gonna she's gonna win this thing. They might even steal it if they have to, if it comes to that. So I really thought that was the agenda was gonna win out. The regime was gonna win out. But anyway, that's what I thought. Now, I got to be honest too. I thought what Trump was saying about, because you couldn't really. He would say, I'm going to bomb the shit out of him. And then he would say also, like, I don't think that we should be meddling over there. And so there was like maybe a 0.9% or whatever, just the smallest percentage possible of, well, maybe he won't be like a war candidate, But all that has gone out the window, and now it seems that the neocons and the new neocons and everybody has their grasp in Trump, just the same way that they probably would have if Hillary was elected. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, this is one of the things I think has had some success for me is people who supported Trump and who voted for him are in a stronger position to change things in his administration than the Democrats and a lot of people on the left who had generated all this, I would argue, distractionary hysteria about Trump.
Yeah.
Because, they believed in him in a lot of ways. And I think one of the most important things they could do is hold his feet to the fire when he's doing things that they don't want. Mm-hmm. So, one of those turning points came recently when he bombed Assad. A lot of people, his supporters, said that they are no longer supporting him, which I thought was a really hopeful development. And I think that that's one of the problems that people get caught up in is sort of defending your team, defending your guy.
Right.
When it really ultimately comes down to the policies, is he doing things that you don't like or doing things that you're in moral opposition to? If that's the case, you need to hold his feet to the fire because otherwise nothing's going to change. And I think, people don't like doing that because they don't want to feed into sort of, this hatred towards Trump. I think that's almost irrelevant because it really does come down to, is Trump, if you were anti-neocon and anti the Bush era and all the wars that Bush did, right now you should be very concerned if you're a Trump voter and Trump supporter because it seems like, this idea that Hillary was going to start World War III seemed possible to me before the election. But I mean, why wouldn't Trump also be poised to do that? I mean, we've seen his personality is not, it seems like it could lead to something dangerous in terms of him wanting to, show off, sort of his power or American strength. Mm-hmm. So, even just sending this armada to North Korea, like the guy seems like he's trying to do all these foreign policy maneuvers in his first 100 days so he can sort of solidify his image in history. I mean, that's the best theory I can come up with. And I think that's even dangerous. I mean, because that's, if he's doing that, it's just all for ego. You know, he wants to, he's basically inching us closer to World War III in order to make himself look good, or, you know, turn the tide around with the mainstream media. But the neocons are smart enough where, even though they talked an enormous amount of shit about Trump, and a lot of them said that they would never support him, they still want war. They still know what happens when an opportunity for war appears, and they'll be there rallying behind Trump and encouraging him to do all these things that it seems like he might do. It's not about Hillary. It's not about the Democrats. They just saw that as their in originally, but this, you know, Trump could create a window of opportunity even larger than Hillary would have created. I mean, we'll just have to see what happens, but I've already seen neocons praising Trump recently, especially for his bombing in Syria.
Right.
So they'll find a way to get in no matter what. It doesn't matter to them who's in office. And I think that's, you know, the military industrial complex it doesn't care. It's all it cares about is making money and finding ways to generate war. And I think that they'll find plenty of those opportunities under Trump. And I think all of his supporters, it's their responsibility to, you know, the ones that are anti-war, it's their responsibility to stand up and, you know, speak out against it at the very least.
Yeah, hell yeah, man. You said something in the beginning of the podcast about how, you know, a lot of these radical, fundamental kind of groups and things like that, they share a similar tone of their ideology is more similar than it is different. You know, with you're talking about neocons and you know, radical, like you know, ISIS people and things like that. Most people would say, "What are you, crazy? There's no way are these people anywhere near being similar." But I know they are, and I would assume that you probably could shed a little bit more light on some of that. You know, just kind of break that down a little bit in terms of what do these people want? You know, the agenda is definitely a heavy one, as you put it in the title of your film. So what is it? What's the agenda?
Well, I think the weird thing is for me, I came to this conclusion after making all of these, is that I think the agenda comes down to symbolism. For the neocons, they believe that as long as America is willing to assert itself in this dominant position, then it will be able to maintain the sort of world system that, you know, by America being on the top of the pyramid, it keeps the world in sort of a stable place. And the neocons, it's almost like a gamble for them every time. They're gambling on the fact that as long as America stands up and acts tough and pulls its dick out, you know, in every scenario, then the other countries are, you know, are likely to back down. That's their premise. If America pulls away and acts unsure or changes its mind, like in the case of Obama backing down from that original red line in Syria, then that to them is the biggest disaster ever, because we're literally not even throwing our chips on the table. We're deciding not to throw down, you know, for that round. And to them, they always want to throw their chips down on the table and bet as high as they can every single time. They're basically riding on like just pure confidence and egotism and arrogance, essentially, that it's America's duty to always be the bully on the schoolyard and basically just be like, nope, we're fucking here and we're going to tell you what to do. And it doesn't matter if you disagree, because we have the most nukes. We have the biggest military. You know, we have the most sophisticated intelligence agencies. So yeah, do something about it. I mean, that is their attitude. And in reality, that's really the attitude of most, I think, DC policymakers. Mm-hmm. They have adopted sort of this neoconservative attitude, but the neoconservatives are always one of the things that differentiates them from that more general American exceptionalism attitude is they're always out there. They're almost like a canary in a coal mine, where they're going out there testing talking points, testing different aggressive postures to see if the rest of the DC class will bite and sort of go along with it. And they're always taking the most extreme positions. I mean, the neocons who Trump was having advise him were saying that we should preemptively strike North Korea during, in his transition team. That is not something most DC policymakers believe, but these neocons, if they can get the rest of the DC class to believe that, then their goal is accomplished.
Wow.
Or if they can just get us to attack North Korea, but yeah, there always needs to be, the neocons are smart enough to know where they can't just run roughshod into another country and do something insane without any public support. They need some public support. And I think that's also an important component. And that's where the propaganda campaigns come in. Otherwise, they would just do whatever the hell they wanted to without any regard for the consequences. But they know that the public can be a problem if they don't support them. So
Wow.
that's why sometimes these propaganda campaigns last 2 to 3 years, because it's that important, to sort of wean us into hating Russia. Otherwise, why send weapons to Crimea? Why worry about, Syria and working with Putin? We need to hate Russia first for those things to be pressing issues that we need to fund, the Ukrainian government, army. Or we need to, overthrow Assad. Those kind of things. So,
Right, like Assad has to go. And it's like, no one seems to be asking why. Well, he guesses his own people. Oh, okay. And where's the? It all happens so fast, and it's almost like the like America is like kind of like this guy that just walks into a bar and he's just like, that guy's talking shit over there, and like the guy's like, I didn't say anything. It was like, I heard him talking shit. Did you hear him talking shit? And someone's like, yeah, I heard. All right, cool. Now it's cool to go beat up on him. And it's like, whoa. We're just making these accusations and then just rolling out with our plans. Yeah, and you said the control of the public is because they got to have that. I love this quote from I forgot exactly who it's from, but it's from I think a former Nazi officer in after World War II at the Nuremberg trials was saying he says of course the people don't want war, but the leaders of the country, they can always get the war that they want, because if it's a democracy or a dictatorship, it doesn't matter. All you have to do is just shape the opinions of the public, and the people can be brought to do the bidding of the leaders. You just have to tell them they're being attacked, or there's some kind of fear out there or something that they should be afraid of or worried about. And then anybody who is like a pacifist or against it, you can just say that they're not patriotic and demonize them, and that they're exposing the country to great danger. And that seems to be the kind of psychological tool used still to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of why I think that the Trump movement and sort of the nationalism behind it sort of runs in contradiction to the sort of anti-interventionist, anti-war stuff Trump was throwing out, because on a certain level, it's that arrogance of our country has the right to do this, that I think fuels a lot of this. And I just think that needs to be analyzed. It's like, why does America have the right to do all these things?
Right.
Why don't we reflect when we murder children in other countries, to catch one guy who is essentially pre-crime, a guy who might commit a terrorist attack. That's absurd.
Yeah.
It's not absurd. It's disgusting. It's horrific. It shouldn't be accepted. So I think it's like you need to peel back these layers to really make people realize that it's not unpatriotic to question these things. It's sort of your duty. It actually is patriotic to question them, because if you believe,
yes,
if you want to sort of twist around, what nationalism really means. If you believe in the integrity of this country, and you really are, pro-America, why do you want America's image to be tarnished like this? I mean, at a certain point, we're going to go down in history as one of the most horrible empires that ever existed. I mean, I really believe that, I mean, if America doesn't, if we don't survive this, and I hate to, sound dystopian, but like other great empires in history, how is America going to be seen in history books, hundreds of years from now, for dropping the atomic bombs in Japan, and turning the Japanese, I mean, having Gitmo, these things are not going to look good. They don't look good right now,
Right.
but it's like, without I think it's hard for people to see outside of that. It's because, and you brought this up earlier, it's because a lot of this has become normalized.
Yeah.
It just needs to be, it's not normal.
Right.
And I think it needs to be seen for what it is. It's evil, really.
Yeah, it is. It's evil. It's anti-human, and we're living in this crazy time of so many things in our culture, so many things in our society that seem to go against the grain of our natural human health and well-being and power and energy of who we really are as a species and what we're really capable of. And you see it with whether it's agriculture and big pharma and all this kind of stuff, pollution, the environment. It just seems like we're really shitting on ourselves in a lot of different ways, and just kind of, instead of cleaning the shit up, we're just like, just trying to put a different shirt on or whatever, so we don't see the shit so much, but really what it is just this complete kind of checking out and just letting all this stuff happen. You're right. I think we're kind of complicit in a way, almost like what's going on. Like you said something earlier about how you're like, look, this is being done in our name. Like when 59 Tomahawk missiles get launched into Syria, those are from America. I'm an American, so that's being, these people are taking action in my name and in your name and in all of our names. And it's, in a way, it's like, why? Like we didn't nothing happened to us. Nothing really happened here. I mean, we didn't really give approval for this to happen, but it's being done. And I always try and like break it down on like a smaller level. Like if you imagine, like, okay, we live in this big country and this, there's all these crazy systems and institutions and things like that. But if we were just like 10 people on like an island and one guy decided to just go launch a bunch of missiles at someone else, we'd be like, dude, what are you doing? Like you're being a dick. You're being a dick right now. Like, why are you doing that? We didn't approve that. We didn't authorize that. We would hate that person for doing something on behalf of us that we didn't really want. But yeah, like a lot of people are checked out, and a lot of people aren't really fully informed about the truth. And then you also have this other thing, which I feel happens a lot, is you get in these conversations about what we're doing and America's role in the world, 9/11, foreign interventionism, protecting freedom, democracy, and this sort of thing. And eventually it devolves into a religious argument. And that's where it becomes a little bit more tricky, because you think you have people making the argument, look, there's these radical Islamic terrorists, and they, their version of their religious texts basically say, kill people who aren't like us and death to America. So it's a religious war now. This is where we have it gets a little bit thicker into the weeds. What's your take on this? I mean, do you think like there's people who are really true believers? I have a tendency to think that there are, these kind of fundamentalist believers, and that's kind of where I was getting at a little bit earlier when I was talking about the ideologies and how they're similar. I think you have these people that are true believers and that do think this, that with American exceptionalism. Let me see if I could try and break this down a little bit so it's a little bit easier to explain. The use of American exceptionalism and patriotism combined with kind of a religious duty, a kind of moral duty, or to preserve Christian values, or that sort of thing. Those things get kind of interwoven and used as an excuse to go and do all the things that we do across the globe. And I would argue that I think that in terms of Islam, that you have the same sort of thing happening, where a lot of these people are getting used. They're getting, they're using the book of the Quran, they're using their religious teachings, and they're twisting them, and they're getting these people all worked up in a frenzy of patriotism and religious duty and honor and something bigger than themselves. So when the conversation, a lot of times if I say that to people, they'll be like, I can't believe that you're comparing American patriotism and Christianity to Islam and terrorism. But I'm sorry to say, actually, I'm not sorry to say, I see them as one and the same. What's the difference? What do you have to say about that?
Well, no, it's interesting you bring that up, because I was just kind of doing this thought experiment last night, and I was kind of joking when I was saying it, but I think it's worth going through. Is basically, when you watch an ISIS video, and I don't really recommend anybody watch an uncensored ISIS video, but it's fucking, I mean, it's absolutely brutal, and it's done in this sort of, celebratory fashion with high production values. They'll, blow like 4 prisoners' heads off, kneeling on the ground with like extremely high quality HD video and, decent cinematography. And, they kill Christians. I think that sort of created a new sort of hatreds towards not just ISIS, but the Muslim world at large in America. That ISIS was actually like, specifically targeting Christians and things like that. But I always, if we actually saw video presentations like ISIS makes about what America does when they kill people, like just one example, imagine something that looked like an ISIS video with 5, Muslim guys tied up or chained up, and then an American jet plane, flies, in the sky and just drops a missile on them on video, and just obliterates them. I mean, is that really, is what ISIS is doing really that, is it worse? Is it somehow more evil? I mean, I think we really need to look at, like, we just don't see here,
right,
the video evidence in sort of this celebratory fashion of the murders that that our weaponry causes. But if we got to see video and photography of all the people that we've killed, I think it would become very clear very quickly that what we're doing is, hundreds of times at the very least worse than anything ISIS is even remotely capable of. I mean, there is no comparison, really. Yeah. There's a savagery, there's a brutality that ISIS has that, harkens back to an earlier, period of our history. But it's like, why is this technological sophistication and this calculated coldness any more morally superior, really, that we do?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost, and you're comparing the ideologies. I mean, in some ways, ISIS makes more sense to me than what we do and what we accept, because, there is a more strong Islamic undercurrent in those parts of the world. And, there is more religious fundamentalism that's much more ingrained historically. We're really a baby nation,
right,
in a sense, in a historical timeline where, I mean, it doesn't really, there's no reason, like, there's not even really, the ideology is almost, it's secular in the sense that, like, this neoconservative American empire ideology, it is a form of fundamentalism, but it isn't even based on, like, cultural traditions dating back, thousands of years or, hundreds of years. It's just based on pure arrogance and power, really.
Right.
If you think about it,
yeah.
Which is, and I think that, the movie Power of Nightmares by Adam Curtis does an amazing job of comparing the way that the Bush administration operated with the sort of Al-Qaeda Islamic fundamentalism, because at the heart of it, the neocons had a symbiotic relationship with Islamic fundamentalists, and not just Islamic fundamentalists, I mean like actual terrorists. I mean, there's and I think this is something that needs to be said, is there are a lot of Islamic fundamentalists who aren't terrorists. I mean, just like there's a lot of other religious fundamentalists who aren't terrorists.
Right.
But the neocons depended on them because, as the title of Adam Curtis's movie, it's the power of nightmares. If neocons could keep, scheming these terrifying nightmares, like what if a terrorist blew off a nuke in New York, or what if a terrorist brought sarin gas on a subway? All these sort of nightmare scenarios they're concocting wouldn't have been believable if it wasn't for an organization like Al Qaeda, and they can continually use them. And now they use ISIS to be like, well, what if they do this? What if they do that? What if? So it's almost like they depend on that energy for their own power, because without that power of nightmares, what do they really have? They need to make us afraid. And I think that's, while their ideologies definitely have a similar fundamentalism, I think that's almost a more important dynamic, that it's like, the neocons need either scary terrorists as scapegoats or Russia. And that's why we've seen, this sort of rise of Russia hysteria, because on some level, Islamic terrorism is not generating enough fear for them to accomplish their goals. Sounds hard to believe, but I think that's true. They want to keep pushing the envelope even further and further and more intensely. And they need to throw Russia into the mix to do that, because America, I think during the Cold War, we were almost at our most vulnerable mentally. We were very malleable. We were very afraid. There were duck and cover drills in elementary schools for nukes.
Yeah.
Air raid sirens, air raid shelters. So there's that ingrained trauma. And neocons are like, well, why not just bring out that trauma again? That was incredibly useful fear, and we could use that again right now. So I think that's kind of what's going on. And I've just in the last week, I've seen people talking about nukes again, because of North Korea, and it's just like, my God, like we really are already back in that mentality, that very vulnerable mentality.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. Yesterday I was at just the Easter Sunday gathering with some family and stuff, and that came up. Someone was like, this guy Kim Jong is crazy and he's got nukes. I don't know what's going to happen. We're all going to get blown up. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know. I thought it just seems like there's this, it's like that. As soon as I hear something like that, my mind triggers to, oh, okay, like the fear mongers are winning. This is the route that they're taking now, because I mean, you're right. It is. It's like this ideology of fear, this selling of fear. And I just got to say, I also really love in your film that when showing the meticulous planning and the change of direction that things will go, the use of the media, how they slowly drip this out. I said this a few times, but it really is so important to kind of hammer home, because if you study this stuff, and maybe some people don't have time to study this stuff, but if you watch a very heavy agenda, your film, you'll see how they start to roll out these new plans. And I think there was a piece in there where you showed Kagan wrote a letter to was it Clinton, talking about how we need to overthrow Saddam, right, in 98.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's like they have these plans and they start these things, and then they kind of, the gears are in motions and the wheels are turning, and they're very astute at adapting to the changing cultural climate. And ISIS isn't scary enough anymore. All right, let's go to Russia. Oh man. Well, we're at about an hour and a half right now. I think this has been a great conversation. I really enjoy speaking with you. You just seem to have such a wealth of information about all this stuff. And I guess we'll wrap up soon. In closing, What message do you want to give to people about this stuff? Because like I said, I mean, this is the show that I'm doing now with this podcast. It's really, I'm touching on all kinds of things, but I think that we can't leave politics out of the equation, and especially when it comes to being anti-war, we can't just forget about this and go just take mushrooms every day and think everything's going to be okay. I think that it all plays into the it's all whole. There's a holistic approach that needs to be addressed here in terms of, if we want to live in a better world, if we want to see more peace in our lifetime, what are some of the things that you want to say to people? Like, what's your message? Just like give your John Galt speech. No.
I mean, I think I think what you just said is really valuable about having a holistic approach to this. It can't just be, I'm not, well, actually, I think it's fine, if someone wants to just be strictly an anti-war activist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean this in a disparaging way at all. It is, in some ways, it's low-hanging fruit. It's very apparent once learning the geopolitics and the dynamics of that's a little challenging, but just knowing on a fundamental moral level that what we're doing is wrong, I think is very easy for most people to grasp. And I think that, one of the, big things standing in the way of that is sort of this patriotism and American exceptionalism, that's seen as, if you're anti war, or anti what the U.S. military is doing, that somehow makes you anti-patriotic. I don't believe that, but I think it's standing in a lot of people's way. But I think that there's so many different aspects to what's going on right now that you can no longer just say this is the government war machine, and that needs to be stopped. And once that's stopped, or we put the brakes on, then we're going to be sort of fine. We're going to be able to, breathe and kind of chill, because now we have these, megalithic international corporations that are working hand in glove with the United States government and all these other countries around the world that are doing horrible things along with us. I mean, you even have, and they're not even they're not even part of the military-industrial complex. They're also part of the media landscape. I mean, they're the ones helping and aiding this propaganda along. I mean, in some ways directly, taking scripting from the government and passing it on to us. And I think it's also really important to, look at which corporations are really a part of this, which defense contractors are playing into this, and that's easy to see. It's a little harder to detect which media companies are also a part of this. I mean, it's obvious to point to CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, those are all the big ones. But I think that the propaganda, as you pointed out earlier, has become more sophisticated, and we're in a new era of information war where it's full spectrum now. It's the propaganda is not just coming in through the mainstream media. It's also coming in through the alternative media now. The alternative media became, it blew up over the last 5 or 6 years. It's become something that people trust more than the mainstream media. Well, guess what? The government's not stupid. They know that. They've already found a way to infiltrate it. And I'm not going to accuse anybody specifically. I have my own theories on who's sort of a useful idiot for government propaganda right now. But, one easy to point to example is Trump has done a wonderful job. And I think Dave brought this up on an episode of Part of the Problem. You guys had a discussion about this conspiracy dog whistling that Trump did.
Yeah.
Where he was able to shore up a untapped into contingent of the American voting public of all these people who are more inclined to believe in conspiracies. Some of them true, some of them not true. There's a different, there's a wide swath of conspiracy theory culture online, going all the way from crazy, completely ridiculous things to conspiracy fact.
Yeah. Flat Earth to 9/11 was an inside job. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Trump, one great example of how he did this is he actually said, if you vote for me, you will find out who knocked down the World Trade Center. And for a lot of conspiracy people, that is like, that's that's red meat. That's like, that's to them, like, they're like, oh my God, like this guy's gonna, he's gonna uncover 9/11. And, there were some huge alternative media outlets around that helped propel that message, that have a huge audience of conspiracy theorists that were sort of telling their audience, vote for Trump and he is going to find out what really happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
AKA he's a secret 9/11 truther. And like that, that's really, really powerful. And I think that needs to be addressed now. It's like we've moved into a new era where, the government and the deep state and the military industrial complex are using outlets like the Daily Beast, BuzzFeed, Vox, these smaller outlets, Vice even, puts out propaganda.
Yeah.
About Russia, about Syria. They never bring on anti-war leftists to have a voice about Syria, Russia.
It's so sad because I thought they were one of the good ones.
Vice. I mean, Vice has the appearance of being this very hip, liberal, lefty, young, millennial outlet, but it's like their political content is surprisingly in line with the sort of neoliberal, neoconservative agenda. And that's also, that makes things more complicated. But at the same time, now you have a presidential candidate who's utilized the alternative media conspiracy circuit to get elected. And now he's still using it as president to put out his own propaganda. And that's very dangerous as well, because as you have a lot of these Trump supporters pulling away from him now because of his Syria bombing, Trump is using his connection to all these alternative media outlets to put out a counter message saying that he's still, that he's being manipulated by neocons inside his administration, to want to send troops into Syria and stuff. So even if he does send troops into Syria, it's somehow not his fault. And I just think, I may have gone off a little bit of a tangent, but I just think it's really important to look at all forms of media with skepticism and really, there's definitely some media outlets that put out very consistent, trustworthy material, but just because something is saying things that you want to hear doesn't necessarily mean that it's a truth-telling outlet. So I think that it's you got to be really careful with where you get your information from. And when it comes to like, if you're interested in an anti-war philosophy and you want to stop these wars or you want to see them stopped, being sort of, a sycophant for any politician, whether it be Trump or Hillary Clinton or even Bernie, is just, I think it's a dead end. I think that you need to address the policies and criticize the policies regardless of who you like or, what your affiliation is, because otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. We're just going to keep fighting with each other and, going back and forth and keeping this divide going. But anti-war is definitely something that we can form a bipartisan consensus on, just like the neocons that do it with pro-war.
Right.
If they can do that, why can't we do the opposite? So.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's so true. And it's like, you're right. I mean, how much longer are we going to keep going in this cycle? It's like I almost feel like I'm in this like weird kind of like Twilight Zone, like Black Mirror episode where like the same it's the same show, like it's just keeps repeating, like the same kind of lies, the same kind of situations are happening, the same kind of things in different ways, of course. And yeah, that was a beautiful breakdown of what was going on with Trump and the alternative news and and all that stuff, because I think it's so true, and it's like, you see these new media websites and things online. You're like, oh, cool, like a new kind of millennial focused outlet, and they seem to be kind of having their finger on the pulse of the culture, but then they seem to be so tone deaf to a bunch of other stuff, and just like you said, towing the party line as far as the foreign policy and that sort of thing, and propaganda. It's pretty sad. So yeah, I mean, it's a mess out there. We gotta I don't know what's gonna happen, but anyway, yeah, we'll wrap things up there. I mean, I think that and for thank you for coming on, Robbie. Really appreciate it. And It was a pleasure
Thanks
to
for
talk
having
to
me,
you.
man.
Yeah. So tell people where they can go and find you at your, I know mediaroots.org is one place to go, and then just give them all your plugs and all the websites and places they can find you and follow you.
Sure. Yeah. So Media Roots is the podcast I do with my sister Abby Martin. We try to put out an episode a week. Sometimes we flake out and we only get out maybe 2 episodes a month. But
Flake out, you liberal Californians! Come on, man, get on the ball.
And you can support us there on Patreon. For the podcast. And then she also does a solo show that I do the music for, and sometimes I contribute to in other ways, called Empire Files, which is sort of like a 30-minute mini documentary show that she produces for Telesur. And a very heavy agenda. There are DVDs still available of it. I sell it as a set individually, or even as like a box set. You can get this nice, pretty little box sleeve to put them all in. That version comes with an extra bonus DVD with about 3 hours of additional stuff I couldn't put in the movie. So it's actually 10.5 hours of content if you get that. And you could also watch it on Vimeo.com. So if you go to their on-demand section of Vimeo, it's on there. All 3 parts are on there. And it's been a while actually since I've been asked to talk about the movie. So I think for your listeners, it would be cool, and if you're okay with this, to offer a promo code.
Oh yeah.
Just for your listening audience. So might as well just call it your show name. So if people type in Micadelic as the promo code at checkout, when you click rent or buy all on the Vimeo link, you'll get 50% off of the whole trilogy. Or you can do it on an individual part if you don't want to watch the whole thing.
Cool, man. Thanks for doing that. That sounds really good. Yeah, and I highly recommend it. I mean, it's just it's very unique. There's nothing really out there that's like that, and it's just like so specific in terms of looking at these people that are behind the scenes. I mean, it's unbelievable how you just really constantly stay focused on these individuals, Victoria Nuland and Kagan and Crystal and Wolfowitz and these guys, and even the new guys that we were just talking about, Kurchik and the others. And it really paints a very clear picture and an in-depth, detailed picture and analysis of what's happening behind, at these think tanks and with this foreign policy and aptly named heavy agenda that's been going on. So kudos to you for making such a compelling, interesting, and in-depth film series. And we'll put those links down there at the show notes and whatnot. And just thanks again, man, for coming on. I really enjoyed this discussion. And guys, go check out Robbie's work and follow him on Twitter at Fluorescent Gray, right? That's your Twitter handle. Yeah. Follow him on Twitter, and thanks again. And to everybody out there, anti-war is obviously the only way to go. Doesn't matter if you're left, right, center, green, blue, pink, purple, whatever. You could be a midget. You could be 8 feet tall. You could be anything. Just oppose war. All right. Till next time. Peace, everybody. Thank you.
Terrorism has long been a tactic. But modern technology allows a few small men with outsized rage to murder innocents on a horrific scale. friends, and our allies. We've killed our friends. We've killed our friends. We've killed our friends. We've killed our friends. We've killed our friends and our allies. We've killed our friends and our allies. We've killed our friends. We've killed our friends. We've killed our friends. We've killed our friends. We've killed all potential terrorist targets, regardless of whether or not they are American citizens. We've killed all potential terrorist targets, regardless of whether or not they are American citizens. We've killed with a drone or with a shotgun without due process. We've killed any U.S. citizen. We've killed with a drone or with a shotgun without due process. We've killed 3 other Americans in drone strikes. We've killed Anwar al-Awlaki. We've killed Muammar Gaddafi. We've killed Osama bin Laden. We've killed Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden. We've killed inside Pakistan. Inside Pakistan. Inside Pakistan. We've killed in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan. In Afghanistan. We've killed the people of Libya. People of Libya. People of Libya. We've killed Arab nations. Arab nations. Arab nations. Kids on the basketball court. We've killed kids on the basketball